I was at Warwick Castle the other week. Massive, beautiful, and very good at making you feel like you stepped onto the set of some big budget medieval drama. And in one of the displays, I saw it. A battle helmet, possibly worn by Thomas de Beauchamp himself. Heavy, intimidating, and clearly designed for someone who didn't mind their peripheral vision being obliterated. I'll include a photo that I took of it at the end of the video. But standing there, looking at it, I realised something. This wasn't just a helmet. This was a prop from the life of a man nicknamed the Devil of Warwick. And that's the sort of title you don't just stumble into, you earn it. Thomas was born in 1313, the son of the 10th Earl of Warwick, Guy de Beauchamp, and grew up in the shadow of Warwick Castle. All grey walls and draughts colder than your ex's shoulder. Imagine being raised where every corridor echoes your father's title back at you like a smug parrot. His playground was Warwick Castle, his toys were training swords, and instead of nursery rhymes, he got told which family they were at war with this season. It's worth remembering that in those days, being a noble didn't mean lounging around all day. It meant prepping for war constantly. For Thomas, it wasn't what do you want to be, it was you are the Earl lad, try not to embarrass the armour, which meant no mucking out pigs for him. From the start, he's marinated in duty. Pages, squires, that endless grind of learning not just how to swing a sword, but how to sit in council without yawning. You're drilled in how to be obeyed before you've learned how to ask a question. By the time he was in his teens, he'd already been knighted. Most of us were just trying to survive PE lessons at that age. Thomas was riding into battle in armour, probably wondering if the French king would be there, and it turned out, yes, eventually he would be. Thomas fought under Edward III in the 100 Years' War, and wasn't just a hang back and let the lads do the work kind of lord. He was also Marshal of England. He was regarded as one of the key military leaders of his time, fighting in Crécy, where the English longbow absolutely humiliated the French. He was at Poitiers, where the French king himself was captured, and he took part in the siege of Calais, which was basically medieval endurance camping with swords. And it's noted that upon his arrival at Calais, the Duke of Burgundy fled to avoid the man they called the Devil. These weren't token appearances either. Thomas was right in the thick of it, giving orders and taking hits. That's how you build a reputation. That's how you start hearing people whispering your name like it's a warning. When he came back to Warwick Castle between campaigns, it wasn't to put his feet up. He ran his lands like a strict head teacher with an armoured fist. You paid your dues, you kept the roads safe. You didn't argue loudly unless you were fond of ditches. Reputation did half his hunting for him. Folk behave when they think you bite. He turned the place into a proper military machine. Training, logistics, keeping the road safe, and making sure his men were ready to go at a moment's notice. He even funded churches and charitable works, which sounds all lovely and wholesome until you realise it was also a smart political move. After all, nothing says trust me like handing over gold for a new altar. Even devils need altars apparently. But if you're imagining him as a kindly church-funding old uncle, think again. Thomas was sharp. He was the kind of man who could make you feel 10 inches tall with just a glance. And in politics, that edge was going to get him in trouble. The trouble's name was Richard II. The king had a habit of surrounding himself with favourites. Men the rest of the nobility didn't exactly rate. Men like Thomas preferred their monarchs useful, steady in war, sharp in law. Thomas joined a group called the Lords Appellant, which sounds polite but was basically a medieval "we've had enough of your nonsense" club. A group of powerful lords who thought the king's chosen men were ruining England. Nothing's changed much there, has it? They confronted the king, ousted his favourites, and in some cases had them executed. It all came to a head in 1387 when Radcot Bridge rang with steel, where Thomas and the other appellants made it clear who was running the show. That kind of thing doesn't just get swept under the rug. When Richard got his power back, he came for them hard. Thomas was accused of treason, sentenced to death, and only spared because the king decided humiliation was better than execution. Send a message to the realm, defy me and learn new meanings of the word unpleasant. His titles were stripped, his lands taken, and he was locked away, imprisoned in the Beauchamp Tower of the Tower of London, then exiled possibly to the Isle of Man, depending on which account you read. Imagine that. One day you're the most feared knight in England, the next you're in a cold stone cell thinking, well, that escalated quickly. And Thomas had time to think about his campaigns, about his defiance, about the fact that the Devil of Warwick doesn't sound quite as intimidating when you're coughing in the damp and peeing where you sleep. In that chill quiet, he counted enemies, friends who weren't, and the prayers he'd never meant before. He'd been called devil enough times to wonder if the shoe fit. He thought of the men he'd ordered to the line, the boys who'd ridden out and not ridden back. He thought of Warwick Castle without him, fires lit by other hands, banners taken down, gossips leaning into their cups. So much for the devil. He didn't break, he hardened differently. There's the hardness that charges a gate and a hardness that waits. He learned the second because there was nothing else to learn. But medieval politics was nothing if not fickle. In 1399, Henry Bolingbroke returned from exile, booted Richard off the throne, and became Henry IV. Thomas suddenly found himself back in favour. He walked out of prison a thinner man with a thicker understanding. Lands restored, titles returned. Warwick's banners shaken out and raised again. That first night back in his hall, imagine the cheer, the relief, the looks that say, "We didn't sell your plate, promise." He sat, warmed his hands and felt the castle breathe with him again. He wasn't 20, he wasn't even 40. He tasted consequence and came back. The devil had learned to smile without showing all his teeth. By then, he was older, wiser, and maybe just a touch more careful. He still had the presence, still the devil, but now one who occasionally let the leash out before tightening it again. He put more money into churches and almshouses, which might have been genuine pity or might have been a man hedging his bets with the afterlife. He kept Warwick running like clockwork, still trained men for war, but he didn't pick fights with the king anymore. He trained his household to hold first, charge second. He cut fewer throats and signed more charters. He learned to delegate in a way that didn't feel like blasphemy. The men around him noticed the devil could host a council without turning into a threat. Did he change because prison softened him? Not really. It sharpened him toward different ends. Easy to be merciful when you can't lift a sword, harder when you can. He had the option now, and sometimes he took it. The nickname stuck though. The Devil of Warwick wasn't something you could shake off, no matter how many altars you funded. It had been forged in the battlefields like Crécy and Poitiers, in the political gamble of the Lord's appellant, and in the fear his enemies, and sometimes his allies, felt when his name was mentioned. Nicknames are short stories people tell about you because it's easier than learning who you are. He made peace with it like a scar you stopped touching. He knew some peasants crossed themselves when he rode by. He knew others credited him for keeping roads clear and wolves off their door. He learned to accept that the people hold two versions of you at once, the man you are and the myth they need. If the myth kept order, he let it ride alongside him. He died in 1369, aged 56, possibly from the plague while in Calais. His titles restored and his family secure, and somewhere in Warwick Castle, a flag stirred in a drought. The stones didn't speak, but if they could, they'd say, "He kept us standing." As Thomas would probably put it, stone forgets voices and remembers patterns. The pattern I left was order, even if it had fingerprints of iron. Warwick Castle kept its devil. The nickname became legend. Being there the other week, looking at that helmet, you can see why. You can picture him wearing it, visor down, ready to ride. That look in his eye that says, "I've survived kings, you're not going to be a problem." So there you have it, Thomas de Beauchamp, war hero, political rebel, prisoner, and the man they called the Devil of Warwick. The devil part wasn't about evil, it was about power, presence, and a reputation that could travel faster than any messenger. A lord who thought fear was a good manager until fear managed him. And if you've been to Warwick Castle yourself, you know the feeling. That mix of awe and I bet this place has seen some things. Taking a moment in those stone halls and imagining the footsteps of the man who once ruled them. Not with kindness, but with the kind authority that left a mark on England's history. Catch you in the next one.